necessarily across the whole store that often that you get to be real buddy-buddy with everyone, but going into the small store, that's our family.
But over the years that you have accumulated a wealth of DIY skills, so 20 years, and it is something that you realise that you could put to good use.
Yeah, well, I guess when you get dealt information like that, your head starts spinning around in all sorts of things, and this thing just popped up one morning, so all of a sudden I found myself thinking of all the time someone come in and asked me questions or brought photos in of what they're doing, and then you'd ask something else and they hadn't had that information. Go away, come back. So I thought there's a possibility that if I went to the client's house and asked them to get all their tools out that they thought they were going to do in the job and see what the work was physically in their property, it may be easier to recall it all for an hour of chat with them. And I could also then explain where, we might have to bring in a couple of people have put themselves out as trade people to come in and just maybe hook the tap up and only charge for that and then go away and let them DIY the rest and certain things like that. So it's jumped on, grabbed an online business card, got that sent home, whacked it on the local page, and then here we are talking to you guys.
I think this is a piece of genius. I think that...
I mean, I'm realistic about it too. At 60, I've got to be able to cope with whatever goes kaboom, but also it's, whenever you do anything like this, I think you've got to be prepared that it's nice to get all the niceties, which I'm getting. But at the end of the day, I need to make sure I can try to keep that rolling to get the actual physically calls. But I don't know how that happens.
How busy are you?
Well, I can't do anything pretty well until the 31st of July, but I've had a call from Temuka. I've got a lady just north who wants to have 4 DIY jobs. The poor Temuka lady had a house fire Monday, and they're waiting for the reports to say whether it can be repaired, and then they want to do a lot of the small stuff. So a lot of people coming through with help and offers and everything. So I think we've had the news in to finish their interview. One News were down today at the shop and did a little bit of a spool on the closing and everything. So I really don't know where it's going to go, but I'm a little bit overawed at what's happened so far. So hopefully I can make a few dollars in my older age.
Well done, Larry. Good on you. Turning some pretty sad news into some pretty positive news, eh? Yeah.
I think one of the keys to this will be how he captures word of mouth. So word of mouth is going to be the thing that will help him sustain this income and turn it into something. So a really deliberate approach to saying, okay, I've done this thing for you. Can you please tell somebody else? Not in an icky kind of way, but in a way that says, you're really enthusiastic about what I've done. Can you make sure somebody else is? That's how this kind of business grows. You don't have enough money to market it properly. This kind of attention's fantastic, but it does fade. People forget, and just keeping that momentum. I just think it's such a good idea. Somebody like me who's just terrified of DIY and can't do it and is any attempt of it, having somebody come and stand alongside me, not do it, but help me with it, is, I think, a piece of genius.
DIY consultant.
I normally need someone to come in and repair what I've attempted to achieve.
Same here. All right.
The only bit of DIY I do is phoning somebody to get
Michael Moynihan and Sally Wenley, thank you very much for your time this afternoon. And I'm back tomorrow from 3:45 Thursday. Checkpoint next. Have a good evening.
Whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. E haere ake nei, the Prime Minister says New Zealand's a safe haven in a dangerous world, as she warns the team of 5 million to guard against a second wave of coronavirus. Meanwhile, in Melbourne, the countdown's on to COVID lockdown at 11:59 tonight. The city and even streets will literally be divided as high-risk neighbourhoods are ring-fenced for a month, with fines of more than 10 grand for rule breakers. Back home, the government claims credit for creating 20,000 jobs by funding nearly $3 billion worth of infrastructure. A change in tack in the America's Cup spy scandal. The police are involved. And Stuart Nash's claims of fishy goings-on cause a stink.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora ko Susana Leata tēnei. The government is yet to suspend America's Cup funding to Team New Zealand despite claims of financial mismanagement. The team says its events arm fell victim to an email scam and sent money to a Hungarian bank account, but it denies any wrongdoing in the way it has handled public funds. $135 million of taxpayers' money has been committed to next year's Cup, but the Economic Development Minister Phil Twyford says he has not frozen funding.
I'm happy to get advice from EMB on that, but at the moment their priority is to find out exactly what's going on, sort it out so we can get back to organising the America's Cup for this summer.
Phil Twyford, the police are working with Hungarian authorities on the case. The Health Ministry is giving up trying to track down more than 350 people who finished their 14 days managed isolation between June the 9th and 16th. Most of the other 2,159 people who came out of isolation at the same time have been found and tested, but despite repeated efforts, 367 have not. The Director-General of Health, Ashley Bloomfield, says the Ministry will stop trying to reach them this week, but in any event they present a low risk to the community. However, the National Party says the failure to find them is further evidence of problems with the border regime. Its leader Todd Muller says this is another indictment of the system.
And we still have these many hundreds of people in the community that haven't been identified yet and haven't been tested, which from our perspective underlines how incompetent this has been for so many weeks.
Nationals leader Todd Muller. Another 73 cases of COVID-19 have been reported today in Victoria, which is grappling with a resurgence of the virus. New lockdown restrictions have been set for 300,000 people in several Melbourne suburbs designated as infection hotspots. The state's health minister, Jenny Mikakos, says people in those areas must get tested.
To the 300,000 individuals living in those restricted postcodes, we are making it much easier for you to be tested. Please get tested regardless of whether you have symptoms. This is important for your safety and the safety of the rest of our state.
Victoria's Health Minister, Jenny Mikakos. The National Party doubts whether the government will deliver on the infrastructure projects it plans to invest billions in. Nearly $3 billion from the COVID-19 Response and Recovery Fund will be spent on more than 150 projects, 12 of which have so far been announced. The government hopes the investment will create more than 20,000 jobs, but National's infrastructure spokesperson Chris Bishop can't see it happening.
This government's chronic failure is a complete inability to deliver on what they promise, whether it's roading projects that they've delayed or cancelled and then brought back that haven't actually started yet, or if it's the Auckland Light Rail project that they've spent 3 years essentially doing nothing on. They've just got a real failure to deliver.
National MP Chris Bishop. New laws restoring the right to legal representation in disputes over children in the family court come into force today. The change, part of a family court package in this year's budget, is a reversal of the controversial 2014 family law reforms. It restores the right to legal representation at the start of a care of children dispute and allows parties, where eligible, to access legal aid. The Justice Minister Andrew Little says this will help support parents through the legal process and reduce delays in resolving cases. The film industry is getting a boost of $73 million from the COVID-19 Response and Recovery Fund. The government says the funding will secure more than 230 screen productions and protect an estimated $250 million of public money already invested in productions. New Zealand On Air is also getting an additional $25 million over 4 years. It's 4 minutes past 5. The Warriors have issued the National Rugby League an ultimatum of July the 19th to grant exemptions for players' families to join them. Otherwise, 3 members of the squad will return to Auckland. Coach Todd Payton has already drawn up a wish list of loan players to replace the homesick trio who are on the verge of quitting the NRL season. He says wingers David Fusitua and Ken Maumalo and prop Ignatius Parsi have become increasingly frustrated at the lack of progress, particularly as the NRL had promised exemptions when the Warriors agreed to base themselves in Australia.
Idiotic just to leave it until they go and then we're caught with our pants down. So there is a list. It is being looked at daily. If we haven't heard anything within a week, we've got to, push down that path a little bit further.
Todd Payton. The Wellington Phoenix will play their remaining 6 games in the A-League football competition in the space of 3 weeks. They knew they were playing top-of-the-table Sydney FC in their first game back on July 17th, but the rest of the draw has now been released. There are just 3 days between their second and third games against Perth and Adelaide. All of the round-robin games will be played in New South Wales before the top 6 final series begins on August the 15th, with the grand final on August the 23rd. The Phoenix are currently third on the table. That's the news.
Excise taxes go up.
I don't mind the booze going up, but the rest of it stinks.
Melbourne's cases go up.
There will only be 4 reasons that you are permitted to leave your house, and only if you really have to.
But demand for coffee beans plunges during pandemic lockdowns.
I mean, they dusted off their old plunger, old stovetop, and got into brewing at home.
Always good value for money. Morning Report, weekdays from 6 on air and online.
Now the short forecast from Met Service till midnight tomorrow. Northland to Taumaranui, also Coromandel. Showers in Northland and Auckland, some heavy until tonight. Showers spreading everywhere for a time tonight and tomorrow morning. Taupo and Bay of Plenty mainly fine. Taihape showers, some heavy. Snow to 500 metres affecting many roads. Showers easing tomorrow morning. For Taranaki to Kapiti Coast, scattered showers, more frequent and heavier tonight and tomorrow morning. Clearing Manawatu and Horowhenua Kapiti Coast tomorrow. Gisborne to Wairarapa, also Wellington. Showers, some heavy with snow to 500 metres, easing tomorrow. Gale or severe gale southerlies. Kaikoura Coast and Ranges and Canterbury. Showers becoming isolated tomorrow, snow to 400 metres. Otago, Southland and Southern Fiordland, occasional showers clearing tomorrow afternoon. For the remainder of Marlborough, also Nelson, Buller, Westland and Northern Fiordland, fine weather. Chatham Islands, rain or showers. RNZ National. It's coming up to 7 minutes past 5.
Thanks, Susanna, and welcome to Checkpoint. I'm Lisa Owen. The Emirates Team New Zealand America's Cup spy leak informant scandal deepens, and the government's infrastructure plans for creating 20,000 new jobs, all of that coming up. But we begin tonight with how we felt 13 weeks ago as we braced ourselves for a 4-week lockdown. From 11:59 tonight, it will become a reality for more than 300,000 residents across 10 postcodes and 36 suburbs across Melbourne. It comes as cases there continue to rise, with 73 new cases reported today, and most of those are community transmission. Residents in lockdown will only be able to leave home to exercise or work, buy essential items, and to access child or health care. Anyone crossing the state border into New South Wales from the lockdown zones could be jailed for up to 6 months, and there's an $11,000 instant fine for breaching the rules. The decision to put parts of the city into lockdown has been seized upon on this side of the ditch, with the Prime Minister describing New Zealand as a safe haven in a dangerous world, but warning the Melbourne scenario could happen here. And in an extra twist, breaches by staff in Victoria's quarantine system are suspected to be the cause of the outbreak, as New Zealand works to plug gaps in its own border regime. Here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
36 Melbourne suburbs will go back into lockdown in a matter of hours, to the dismay of residents and local businesses.
Pure shock and horror. It was just like being punched, really.
Movements around the affected suburbs will be restricted, and people will only be allowed to leave the house for food and essentials, work and study, caregiving or exercise until July the 29th. The situation facing restaurant owner Janine Barracan, who's now busy cancelling all future bookings, will bring back bad memories for those in New Zealand's hospitality scene.
We have bookings all the way till next month already, so when I got here, I had to call people and tell them that I have to cancel just because of the lockdown.
Each and every home within those postcodes from 11:59pm tomorrow night will have to stay in their homes, except for those 4
The Victorian Premier, Daniel Andrews, outlining the conditions ahead of the lockdown at midnight Australian time. He said failures in the state's hotel quarantine program were a key factor in dozens of coronavirus cases.
Attributable via genomic sequencing to staff members in hotel quarantine breaching well-known and well-understood infection control protocols. That is unacceptable to me. I'm sure that will be unacceptable, certainly, to all of those who will be impacted by the restrictions.
Back in New Zealand, the Director-General of Health, Ashley Bloomfield, said the news from Australia should serve as a reminder
that community transmission in the future is a real possibility, and we may here need to take measures to local measures to counteract community transmission if it occurs again. We will be watching carefully and continue to work on a daily basis with our Australian colleagues to see what's happening there.
Echoed by the Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern a short time later.
It is an example of how easily the virus can take hold again and why vigilance is so important. It is a good reminder that New Zealand is currently a safe haven in a very dangerous world.
Dr Bloomfield making a plea on behalf of Air New Zealand crew who aren't always getting a friendly reception.
Some staff and crew members, particularly those flying international routes, have been facing some hostility and suspicion in their local communities. Again, this could be your friend or a family member.
There are still more than 360 people who left managed isolation after 2 weeks in early June, but who were not tested. They've been contacted repeatedly but have not come forward. Ms Ardern has a personal message for them.
Do your bit. Get back in contact. It's a small thing that you can do as a member of our team of 5 million.
Nationals leader Todd Muller says the missing 367 people is another indictment of the system.
And we still have these many hundreds of people in the community that haven't been identified yet and haven't been tested, which from our perspective underlines how incompetent this has been for so many weeks.
Meanwhile, New Zealand has joined a global initiative, the COVAX facility, that aims to give all countries access to a vaccine if and when one is created. Details like how much money New Zealand will contribute are still being decided. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Jane Patterson.
Maria Iatru is the president of the Union Road Traders Association, a shopping strip in the Melbourne suburb of Ascot Vale. She also runs the Espresso 155 Cafe, which seats 100 patrons. Part of Union Road, including her cafe, goes into lockdown for a month from 11:59 tonight. The rest of the businesses across the road can continue to operate. A short time ago, I spoke to Maria from what she coined an eclectic group of shops as she prepared to shut up shop and serve only takeaways again from tomorrow.
We have a little bit of everything. We've got cafes, we've got restaurants, we've got a little specialty supermarket, we have health food stores, we've got some retail, we've got some specialist items like solicitors, lawyers and accountants. We've got gyms, a couple of gyms, one that's a Pilates studio. We've got cake shops. We've got our vegan bakery and our very first plant-based butcher. So basically just all alternative type of foods. We've got some organic shops. We've got an electric bike shop. We are a real mix of retailers and traders.
So what is this lockdown at 11:59 tonight when the strict new rules come in? What's it going to mean for businesses on your road?
So it basically means for everybody who's in these particular postcodes that we go back to where we were previously, which was back in April and May, where cafes and restaurants were only allowed to trade takeaway or delivery. The beauty salons all had to be shut. So all of those businesses which have just very recently started to reopen and provide some of these services are now having to close again. The gyms having to close again, all of them. The only main difference at this stage for everybody is that we're no longer working on a level playing field as we were before.
So do you have a strange situation where part of Union Road can trade as per normal and then other sections of it can't due to their postcode?
That's correct. Union Road is about 1 kilometre long. It covers Ascot Vale, and there is some Moonee Ponds, which is another suburb, and that suburb is under another postcode. So the Moonee Ponds section of Union Road is able to trade according to the rules that the rest of Victoria is following at the moment, which has some easing of the restrictions, and the Ascot Vale portion of it now has to follow the previous Stage 3 restrictions again, which means for all those beauty places, no trading at all. For hairdressers, it's very difficult to trade. They can trade with maybe only one person in their stores if they decide to do that. The gyms are not allowed to open at all. Cafes and restaurants can only do takeaway and delivery. A lot of your clothing and retail stores have to shut. So
how
it is a very unusual situation. Sorry.
How difficult do you reckon this is going to be to police then?
From everything I know, all of my understanding is that they won't be setting up roadblocks at every street and every corner that borders suburbs and things like that, which will make it a lot harder to police. Also, people are allowed to leave these postcodes if they are working in a different postcode that's not in lockdown. So it's very difficult to sort of maintain, but they are allowed to spot check, apparently. They can stop you and ask where you're going and where you're from. But if you've got work in another suburb that is in lockdown or isn't, you are allowed to leave.
Do you support the lockdown?
Oh, I think Victoria needs to do what needs to be done. I think it's extremely frustrating and disappointing that we've gotten to this point. I'm looking forward to things going as back to normal as they can. It's a difficult situation all around.
So you've got a cafe. I mean, how long have you been open for, and what's it going to mean for your business?
It basically means we go back to... We traded takeaway and delivery through the original restrictions. We'll be doing the same again, and it basically means the same for all of us on the street that are in the same boat.
That must be pretty tough.
I think it's tough and unfortunately there is not a country, there is not a state, there is not a place in the world that is not affected by this, and I think that there's no way to get around the fact that it's just tough, full stop, everywhere for everyone. There is no one anywhere that has not been affected.
I see that there were business subsidies announced, up to $5,000 grants. Will that help you at all?
There is a $5,000 grant that the Victorian state government is offering to businesses that are affected. As to how much that will help each individual business, it's difficult to say. If I was to speak personally, I'd say it would be a drop in the bucket. It wouldn't do much at all.
That's President of Melbourne's Union Road Traders Association, Maria Iatru. It is almost 19 minutes past 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Keen for your feedback. That'll bring back a few bad memories for some of you out there. Businesses being shut down. Lockdown starts at 11:59 in Melbourne tonight. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Police are now involved in a fast-moving scandal swirling around Team New Zealand and its events arm, America's Cup Events. Investigators are working with overseas authorities to get to the bottom of an alleged Hungarian bank account scam that targeted the sailing syndicate. Meanwhile, the unnamed contractor who tipped the Crown off to alleged mishandling of public funds earmarked for the event has gone to ground. Checkpoint reporter Nick Trubridge filed this story.
Can you give absolute assurances that everything has been completely above board?
Absolutely, and I think the proof of that will be slowly
well, not even that slowly, quickly, as we dispel that with every question we've been asked. And we're slowly doing that. Well, again, not so slowly, as quick as we can, doing that now.
Grant Dalton standing firm, the Team New Zealand boss continuing to bat away claims of financial mismanagement and use of public funds dogging the team's events arm, America's Cup Events. Put simply, the claims from an unnamed contractor relate to concerns around finances and how they were managed. They have prompted an investigation by the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment. Central to the claims is an alleged fraud involving money being deposited into a Hungarian bank account. Dalton, though, today told Checkpoint Team New Zealand had fallen victim to a scam.
In November last year, a sum of money was paid to a legitimate contractor who's involved heavily with the TV production in Europe to a non-legitimate bank account. Now, why the two things are important, be it that it's, money's gone, is that let's call them informants. One of them was the guy that pushes the button that sends the money. And it's a duty of care, if nothing else, by accountants, particularly when the sum of money is that high. Maybe we're not going to check the money for the chicken that we buy for lunch. But when you're in that sort of money, you should check that the bank account is correct, and it wasn't.
And now the police are involved. Detective Inspector Bridget Doles says the report related to a business email scam, and police liaison officers in Europe are working with Hungarian authorities. Almost $250 million in taxpayer and ratepayer money has gone into preparing for the 2021 competition. Dalton is adamant Team New Zealand nor its events arm have misused public money in any way. He says the team will prove that is the case.
Well, I think it has to be proved, because I can say that till the cows come home, but until it's actually proved and we find the motive, I'm pretty focused on that, I can assure you. I'll give those assurances, but until you prove it perfectly for those people like MB, let's wait and see.
The Economic Development Minister Phil Twyford says he's been briefed about the claims regarding public funds.
There's a review underway, there's different claims being made. MB are trying to get to the bottom of it.
But is he worried, since almost $250 million of public money has been pumped into the event, about claims related to the handling of those ratepayer and taxpayer funds?
I'm concerned about the potential for it, and that's why MB's doing the review.
Lawyers for the unnamed informants told Checkpoint they had raised the matters confidentially with MB and would not be commenting publicly. MB says it remains motivated to make the 36 America's Cup a successful event. But right now the regatta's host remains focused on getting through some very rough seas indeed. For Checkpoint, Nick Trubridge.
And we'll put Nick's full interview with Grant Dalton on our Facebook page and the RNZ website. In the midst of the worst water shortage in 25 years, Auckland now has a lifeline. Its bid for more water from the Waikato River will be heard this year. The city's reservoirs have recently been in the low 40%, while its application for more water from the river until yesterday languished 100th in a queue. Jordan Bond looks at what's going on.
Auckland's water managers realised after a bad drought in the 90s that when another one arrived, it needed another source of water to keep the taps on. It was granted consent to take some from the top of the Waikato River, just south of the city's boundaries, before the river flows out to the sea. But as the city grew, to shore up resilience in 2013, it asked for 200 million litres a day more, which would double its take. But it's a slow queue, and there are 100 applications in front of Auckland's. The chair of Waikato Regional Council, Russ Remington, says the Resource Management Act hamstrings them from speeding that up. It's first in, first served.
We've been to the Ministry in 2013 with Watercare, took our CEOs down there and said this is probably not in the best interests of New Zealand, particularly the Auckland application. And the Minister at the time was not David Parker. He said, yep, this is not a beauty parade, that's a law, and you will abide by it.
Since then, the water shortage has become critical. Yesterday, Environment Minister David Parker declared it an issue of national significance.
I think that your largest city having the prospect of running out of drinking water as a matter of national significance very easily meets that test. Everyone knows that this needs to be resolved.
That declaration essentially yanks it out of the long queue and sends it to another process, to be heard by a special board of inquiry. The board will independently make a decision about whether the application should be granted and will be chaired by a judge, either from the Environment Court or High Court. Once it gets underway, a decision is due in 9 months. David Parker says this is a change in process, but it doesn't mean it's a done deal.
No, it doesn't. And one of the things I've asked the panel that's being put together, this Board of Inquiry, to look at is the economics of alternatives. They clearly need drinking water. What's a proper question is, are there affordable alternatives?
Mr Parker says the Resource Management Act must consider the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi, and the River Authority, a joint Crown and iwi organisation, can nominate a board member. A central concern is the long-term health of the Waikato River. How much can be taken and it remain healthy? Some have pointed at what's happening to the Darling River in Australia, at the moment in a very bad way, partially due to the over-allocation of its waters. Russ Remington says they've been breaking their necks to help Auckland out, but the health of the river must be protected.
They can have as much water as they'd like in wintertime, and they know it. Of course, they haven't got the processing capability to do it. When it comes to the summer, it does have a profound negative impact when it comes to the flow of the river as the summer bites in. It's a stress period, and then it has an adverse effect in regard to the fish life and the whole ecology of the Waikato River itself.
The former two-term Auckland Mayor John Banks says it's been clear since the early 2000s Auckland needed more water. He puts the blame squarely on the Resource Management Act, which has halted this progress.
What a ridiculous piece of legislation that has stifled progress in Auckland and is collapsing Auckland around a drought right now. We need to move on it quickly, very quickly. In other words, in the next 6 to 8 weeks, we're going to have this problem again. It's not going to go away when the dams are full. It's going to come back.
A meeting with all the main players is happening this afternoon in Hamilton, coincidentally on the banks of the river itself. No fewer than 7 parties are there, including David Parker, Local Government Minister Nanaia Mahuta, Auckland's Mayor Phil Goff, the Head of Watercare Raveen Jadaram, as well as those with guardianship over the river, the Waikato Regional Council, the Waikato River Authority and Waikato Tainui iwi. Watercare said yesterday the city's staring down the barrel of restrictions until autumn next year. If a deal's not struck or another water source is not on tap by the end of this year, Auckland may well be in for a very dry summer. I Tamaki Makoto, mō te hōtaka o te ahi nei, ko Jordan Bond. Aho.
And that meeting on the banks of the Waikato River that Jordan mentioned in his story is due to wrap up in a few minutes, and we'll bring you more on the situation later in the program. The government has unveiled its multi-million-dollar screen sector recovery package to protect jobs and investment into New Zealand productions in the wake of COVID-19. The screen industry contributes around $3.3 billion to GDP and employs 16,200 people. Now, with us in the studio at Parliament is our political reporter Charlie Drever with the details. Charlie, a lot of money being handed out by the government today. It's hard to keep up. So what is in this package?
Well, one of the biggest highlights of this package is $73 million that's going to a screen production fund, $50 million of which will go towards 5 feature films or limited series screen productions. We've already heard from the government in this year's budget that $140 million will go towards international productions. $25 million of that is going to be reallocated to support New Zealand feature films. New funding for diverse audiences has also been announced. $25 million will go to New Zealand On Air over 4 years to ensure audiences that aren't otherwise well served by broadcast media can get the information that they need.
So how is the government expecting this package will cushion the blow of COVID-19?
Well, the Associate Minister for Arts, Culture and Heritage, Carmel Sepuloni, says that Screen Production Fund will ensure that the more than 230 productions and thousands of New Zealanders that it employs can still go ahead despite, the additional costs that have been incurred due to COVID-19. $23 million of that fund that I mentioned before will be distributed through New Zealand On Air and the New Zealand Film Commission to go towards funding for those additional costs that were incurred due to COVID-19. It also protects about $250 million of public funding that has already been invested into those productions. Many media, as we know, have seen a massive increase of audiences during the COVID-19 response. But unfortunately, that has also led to a dramatic drop in revenue. So that extra $25 million for that diverse audiences, that fund there, will ensure that those groups will still get that information that they need, which has been highlighted throughout the COVID-19 epidemic. But it's not all bad news. The Minister for Economic Development, Phil Twyford, has said that our quick response to COVID-19 has actually given us a competitive edge. It means that film productions here are much safer than overseas and can happen sooner. So hopefully this means with this extra investment, it will bring in some much needed overseas investment as well. For example, like we're seeing with the Avatar films and the Lord of the Rings TV series as well.
Thanks, Charlie. That's our political reporter, Charlie Drever, joining us live from our studio in Parliament. And coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, the Wellington Council warns residents on the city's south coast to make preparations in case they need to evacuate their homes tonight because of foul weather. Minister Stuart Nash's claims of fishy goings-on in the industry is causing a bit of a stink, and a top US disease expert warns the worst could be yet to come with a possible 100,000 cases of COVID-19 a day. We'd love your feedback on Melbourne's lockdown, the government's infrastructure spend, or the situation with Team New Zealand. You can get in touch via text, it's 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or there's the email. So the address for that is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Let's go now to the headlines with Susanna.
A 4-week lockdown has been imposed on more than 300,000 people in Melbourne as Victoria grapples with a resurgence of COVID-19. Another 73 cases have been reported today, the 15th straight day of double-digit increases in the number of new cases, and one of the highest daily counts since the pandemic began. The neighbouring state of New South Wales is clamping down on people travelling to and from Victoria's coronavirus hotspots, with threats of heavy fines and even jail terms. New Zealand has joined a global initiative called the COVAX facility, aimed at giving all countries access to a COVID-19 vaccine if and when one is created. The Foreign Minister Winston Peters says that by joining the facility now, New Zealand will be able to help shape the way it works and the way a vaccine is eventually distributed. The government is yet to suspend America's Cup funding to Team New Zealand, despite claims of financial mismanagement. The team says its events arm fell victim to an email scam and sent money to a Hungarian bank account, but it denies any wrongdoing in the way it has handled public funds. $135 million of taxpayers' money has been committed to next year's Cup, but the Economic Development Minister Phil Twyford says he has not frozen funding. The police say are working with Hungarian authorities on the case. The resignation of the Imam of Dunedin's mosque has prompted an urgent community meeting this Friday as to why he left. Sheikh Azrarul Hake Obaidullah resigned on June the 16th as the Imam of Masjid al-Huda. His last day in the role was June the 20th. A giant dinner party for several thousand people has been held on a medieval bridge in the Czech Republic capital, Prague, as a symbolic farewell to the coronavirus. A 500-metre-long dining table was laid on the 15th century Charles Bridge. The Czech Republic has so far managed to avoid the worst of the pandemic, recording around 12,000 infections and 350 deaths. Those are the latest headlines on RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. For those of you watching, sorry about the little cameo I made into the news there, but Nona needed a tissue, so I just retrieved the box from the floor. This is Checkpoint, and I'm Lisa Owen, and it is time for the business news. Nona Peltier joins me in the studio. Nona, Auckland Airport is laying off more staff. Obviously, all aviation industries have had a rough ride over COVID. So what's the deal? How many jobs?
Okay, so they laid off 180. We knew about that. So we've added another 34 positions. But however, they are going to employ some additional people for new roles. So there's going to be an extra 9. So overall, it's a net 25 extra jobs gone. The company has tallied up the cost of all these one-time expenses, which is not just redundancies, but rent freezes and other kinds of one-off costs. So they're expecting that to cost between $50 and $90 million of one-time expenses. It's quite a lot. But they say, look, their international operation is basically 5% of what it was. they've had a drop in every airline, and they're saying the number of flights each day is down 80%. So it's really not the airport it used to be, obviously, and it's going to take some time before that bounces back, as we've just heard in the news.
Any mention of the bubble, the Trans-Tasman bubble? Because obviously, if they've got so few international flights, they're hanging out for that bubble.
Oh, they are. In fact, they I think it was the chief executive who headed up the committee that was pulling together the plan. And I know that we talked to him previously where he was very anxious, but that was a while back. And I think people have stopped talking about the bubble as much.
Yeah, interesting with what's going on with Melbourne.
Exactly.
Okay, let's move on to the banking sector. This is interesting. 25 ASB bank branches will go to part-time operations only. What does that mean? And some of them are closing too, aren't they?
Yeah, so another 9 are going to close altogether. Well, look, I went through this now. Some of the branches they're closing get 900 customers a year.
Oh.
It's like, 3 a day or something like that. Exactly, 900 customers. So those ones are closing because there's not enough customer interest to even keep them open. Others are going to part-time, so they'll be open 3 days a week. The hours will be 9 to 4:30. But they said that since the lockdown, there's been a big increase in the number of their customers wanting to use digital services or phone services. An extra 13,500 customers who previously had never used digital banking are now using it. And it's just with the ASB Bank. And not only that, but, already, so in the last 5 years, they say that they had seen a 42% drop in the number of people going into the branch, and at the same time an 85% of their customers are digital customers now. So that's where the shift has gone. But interestingly, they're not going to make any staff positions redundant. All those people will be redeployed to other jobs, still banking jobs, but just now digital or on the phone or what have you.
So necessity obviously meant a bunch of people had the push to get online with their banking services. Do we know the part-time operations, are they mainly in small towns?
Well, I'll tell you what, the ones that they're closing are going to be 9. There's 5 in Auckland, 1 each in Hamilton, Christchurch, Mosgiel, and Papamoa.
Okay.
And so it doesn't actually say where the rest would be, but I'm sure if you go online or you call, if you are an ASB customer, I'm sure they'll happily tell you if your branch will be open or not. One of those visits that you do when
I'm sure people will let us know. 2101 on the text if you know.
Absolutely so.
And the markets, what's been happening today?
Okay, so we fell 0.9%. That's a 100-point drop to 11,350. So we're still pretty strong. The dollar is steady, 64.4 US cents and 93.5 Australian, 52.1 British pence. But, the whole market is really a little not sure. With these numbers, these pandemic numbers rising still, that's sort of making people wonder whether or not the economic revival that we're expecting to see, is that actually going to materialise?
Thanks, Nona. That's Nona Peltier with our business news. Upgrades to the Auckland City Mission, East Coast's Rugby Park Grandstand and Blennan's Art Gallery are among the projects getting a boost from the government's $3 billion infrastructure fund. The government has unveiled how money set aside in the COVID Response and Recovery Fund will be allocated across regions. More than 150 projects have been given the green light and are expected to create more than 20,000 jobs. Today, the government gave a flavour of the investments, announcing details of 12 projects across the country and promising more in the coming weeks. Political reporter Yvette McCullough has more.
The government put out the call for shovel-ready projects to help kickstart the COVID-19 economic rebuild. Local councils, community groups and the private sector responded, submitting nearly 2,000 projects across 40 different sectors. Finance Minister Grant Robertson says they've whittled this down to more than 150 projects that will give the sector a pipeline of work.
This is about ensuring ongoing work opportunities. Individual jobs within them will come and go as projects are completed, but this is about that certainty that we constantly hear from the construction sector they want.
Infrastructure Minister Shane Jones says all of the projects will be ready to begin within the next 12 months, and the package also supports projects that were already underway. He says the government is focused on housing and urban development, energy, climate resilience and environmental projects.
This is to dispel the misapprehension that as the infrastructure minister, I'm infatuated with grey infrastructure.
Mr Jones says there's also a big focus on community development.
This announcement is not purely about the big end of town, and infrastructure has to enable a greater quality of life for people down at the grassroots level.
Other projects announced today include a $7 million investment in West Coast ports, advancing plans to create a bulk shipping precinct, creating around 300 jobs. Bulla District Mayor Jamie Klein says it's a significant investment,
which secures and allows the opportunity for growth of the fishing industry, which has been really important economic contributor to Westport for many years.
Taranaki is also getting $37 million to replace its thermal drying facility, which turns biosolids from wastewater into household fertiliser. New Plymouth Mayor Neil Holdham says this will create around 77 jobs and will be a great shot in the arm for the community.
It will provide excellent jobs for our engineering sector at a time when they need work, and will position council well in terms of this is a long-term community asset that helps us protect the environment.
The government also revealed today how the fund will be divvied up across the regions. Auckland will get $500 million, Canterbury $300 million, Otago $260 million, and the Wellington region will get $185 million. Other regions will receive between $85 to $170 million. Mr Robertson says they've tried to strike a balance.
Every region in New Zealand has been affected by COVID-19, so nobody is in a position where they haven't been, but there are some regions where the population is larger, there are some regions where the impact is larger, and so therefore you'll see that reflected in those numbers.
Infrastructure New Zealand CEO Paul Blair says this is welcome news, but the government needs to move rapidly from announcements to action so that jobs can be created and saved.
It will certainly give hope. Having said that, I am aware of several large infrastructure companies that are going through change proposals and unfortunately laying off staff now. The way to mitigate that is to get quickly through into the detail, to do what we can to get the money flowing.
National leader Todd Muller isn't so hopeful. He says the government has a track record of talking a big game but delivering nothing.
Their two signature policies that they went to the election with, Kiwi Build and Light Rail, both promised with much fanfare, total inability to deliver, and that lack of capacity and competency to deliver will be this government's legacy.
Mr Muller says the rollout of big dollar announcements in the coming weeks in the lead up to the election is cynical politicking. The government says they're still doing their due diligence on some projects to make sure they stack up. But they weren't shying away from the fact they will be milking photo ops out in the regions, with Mr Jones saying he wouldn't want to break a habit. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Yvette McCullough.
And we'll hear more from the Infrastructure Minister Shane Jones after 6 tonight. Joe Biden, the man set to take on President Trump for the White House, has launched a blistering attack on the president's handling of the coronavirus pandemic. He says the president is in retreat, with more than 125,000 Americans dead as a result of the pandemic. Infections are surging in many states, causing some governors to delay or change the relaxation of lockdown rules.
Mr. President, the crisis is real. The crisis is real, and it's surging, Mr. President. Your promises and predictions and wishful thinking pulled out of thin air are not only doing the country no good, but making them lose even more faith in their government. America knows this crisis isn't behind us, even if you don't. We need a president, Mr. President. A president who will level with the American people. A president who will tell us the unvarnished truth. A president who will take responsibility instead of always blaming others. A president who will listen to the experts, follow the science, allow them to speak. A president who will lead and be an example for the nation. Wear a mask. Keep your distance. Limit the size of crowds. Mr. President, this is not about you. It's about the health and well-being of the American public.
The top infectious diseases expert in the US, Dr. Anthony Fauci, has also warned that unless the US can control the spread of the virus, the infection rate could more than double.
We can't just focus on those areas that are having the surge. It puts the entire country at risk. We are now having 40,000+ new cases a day. I would not be surprised if we go up to 100,000 a day if this does not turn around, and so I am very concerned.
Dr. Anthony Fauci there. California is the latest state to see a surge in COVID-19 cases, forcing the governor to roll back its reopening and reimpose restrictions. It's seen a 43% jump in hospital admissions due to the virus in the past fortnight alone. And in the past 7 days, the number of positive tests has increased by 45%. It is 5:45. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Some of you getting in touch about the lockdown over the ditch. This is in the state of Victoria, where a number of postcodes neighbourhoods are being shut down 11:59 tonight. And Alan says, can't those whinging Aussies appreciate that being locked down for a month is preferable to being buried for life? Alan's got in touch about the America's Cup, the scandal swirling there, which has taken a different tack today, with the police saying they're investigating a potential scam. Alan says, how on earth could the request to bank funds to an Hungarian bank account, capital letters, not raise suspicions, he says. I, along with a huge number of New Zealanders, never supported the use of public funds to support this non-essential activity because the trickle-down line has never been persuasive or credible. Thanks, Alan. And someone else, another listener, has got in touch. Short and sharp here. Team New Zealand shouldn't have public funding. End of story. If you want to add your thoughts to the mix, do get in touch. You can text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or send us an email. The address is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. The Wellington Council is telling residents on the city's south coast to make preparations in case they need to evacuate their homes tonight because of foul weather lashing the area. Wind gusts of more than 100 kilometres an hour and 6-metre swells are expected tonight, with the worst weather coinciding with the high tide at about 1:30 tomorrow morning. Hamish Cardwell is in Island Bay and joins us now. Well, Hamish, that sounds absolutely delightful. Where are you and what is the situation like?
I'm parked up out in Island Bay, and, I thought it was windy before. I was wandering around chatting to people, and I was nearly getting blown off my feet and literally having to kind of, stand firm to not get blown over. It's gotten windier since then. I'm sitting in my car in Island Bay, and the thing's being shoved around like I'm in a car wash. It's pretty horrible out there. So basically today, a bunch of ferries have been cancelled. Inter-Islander have cancelled a lot, and Blue Bridge is taking a look at it. There's pretty big swells out there already, really big white caps. Like I was saying, I was out chatting to a bunch of people in Ocedo Bay and around the south coast today. People are battening down the hatches. I talked to people who were putting up ply over their sliding doors that's at the sea level and lifting up electronic items and stuff off the floor. There are some anxious residents, but look, I spoke to a couple of long-time locals. They say this kind of weather does happen in this part of the country about once a year, so they're kind of taking it into their stride.
Have you seen any planes coming in while you've been out there?
Actually, not. I am facing in the opposite direction. I haven't seen any yet, and I can't see any in the sky. Oh, no, look, sorry. I've just turned my neck to my left. There is a plane that's taking off. Look, I would not like to be up in a plane right now. It's very horrible.
Me neither, because I always feel like I'm coming in sideways to the Wellington airport at the best of times. Look, Hamish, I wonder if you can brace for us, open the door and get out of the car and just give us a bit of a taster of what it's like out there.
All right.
Are you up for that? Yeah, we've got a second.
Okay. All right, okay. I don't know whether you can even hear me now. It's fairly windy.
Oh yes, it sounds like a lot of static on the line there. So are you kind of crouched down, Hamish, you need a bit of ballast to keep you firmly in the spot, it sounds like.
I'm now crouched down in the lee of the car so that I can hear what you're saying. Hopefully you can hear what I'm saying.
Absolutely can. So all in all, how would you rate it? Pretty unpleasant?
It's pretty horrible out here, yeah.
I appreciate you taking one for the team, Hamish. That is Hamish Cardwell in Island Bay, out in what sounded like a really roaring wind. Let us know if you were in the area. What is it like? Text us on 2101 or you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. Let's head offshore now to Hong Kong. And exactly 23 years ago, the former British territory reverted back to Chinese sovereignty. Beijing at the time promised a degree of autonomy, which was meant to last until 2047. However, now Beijing's new security laws have come into force, making crimes like seeking independence punishable by life imprisonment. Pro-democracy groups are dismayed and the West is concerned, but China is determined that the laws will be followed. Here's the BBC's John Sudworth.
This was the moment China tightened its grip on Hong Kong. The process itself spoke volumes. 162 votes in favour, none against. For a new law, the text of which was kept secret until after it was passed. This is what it's designed to stop. Under the national security law, many of the acts of protest that have rocked Hong Kong over the past year could now be classed as subversion or secession and punished with up to life in prison.
The legislation will not undermine...
Via video link to a UN Human Rights Council meeting, Hong Kong's pro-Beijing leader said the law was long overdue.
The question of how long we could tolerate such a gaping hole in national security has to be asked and answered. Since last June, Hong Kong has been traumatized by escalating violence fanned by external forces.
When the UK handed over control of Hong Kong in 1997, China promised to safeguard the city's freedoms for 50 years. But just 23 years on, the balance is shifting. A National Security Commission will be above the law. Suspects can be extradited to the mainland. For Beijing, a rising, wealthy superpower, this is all meant as a show of confidence. It could, though, also be seen as the opposite. For a system built on denying people a voice, the resistance and dissent in that unruly city to the south presents a real threat. The impact has been immediate. Activists like youth leader Joshua Wong have announced they are stepping back from politics.
Right or wrong?
You've been arrested yourself. This protester's words are spoken by an actor.
People will feel the fear. This will have a chilling effect on Hong Kong society. Many people just stop talking about politics.
With just a few hours before the law took effect, protesters in Hong Kong made their opposition known. A small, brave gesture in a city at risk of losing its voice.
The BBC's John Sudworth there. With a clear eye to China, Australia has fast-tracked its defence spending as it looks to beef up its ability to react to an increasingly contested Indo-Pacific region. The Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, has warned of an increased threat of conflict in the region and the need for the Defence Force. He's promising to spend $270 billion boosting deterrence capabilities with an emphasis on naval capacity and long-range missiles. The ABC's Isabel Rowe reports.
It's a big change in Australia's defence policy, one that our neighbours to the near and far north will be watching closely. The Defence Minister, Linda Reynolds, says the world's geopolitical sands are shifting beneath our feet.
We are in unprecedented times for our society, for our economy, our nation, and indeed for our world.
The Defence Strategic Update shifts Australia's focus to the Indo-Pacific region and to what the Prime Minister Scott Morrison describes as the threat of a post-pandemic world.
Even as we stare down the COVID pandemic at home, we need to also prepare for a post-COVID world that is poorer, that is more dangerous, and that is more disorderly.
Speaking at the Australian Defence Force Academy, the Prime Minister warned Australia has to strengthen its Defence Force as the potential for conflict among our neighbours rises.
Tensions over territorial claims are rising across the Indo-Pacific region, as we have seen recently on the disputed border between India and China, in the South China Sea, and the East China Sea. The risk of miscalculation and even conflict is heightening. Regional military modernisation is occurring at an unprecedented rate.
The new strategy includes investing in long-range strike weapons and cyber capabilities. It marks a boost in defence spending to $270 billion over 10 years, as well as an extra 800 military jobs, mostly in the Navy. Head of the Australian National University's National Security College, Professor Rory Metcalfe.
The announcement shows that Australia is getting serious about deterrence and I guess the prospect of armed conflict in our region, in the Indo-Pacific region. So this is a very significant and serious development.
Is it the right move?
I think it's inevitable. I think it was only a matter of time before the Australian government made a choice about the kind of defence force that we're going to have in the 21st century. With the rapid deterioration of the strategic environment in recent years, the difference is now that the government has accepted that the Australian military needs to be able to attempt to deter armed conflict through its capabilities and to be able to fight in our region if we have to.
And on those capabilities, there was a brief mention of long-range missiles. What sort of weapon are we talking about here?
It's essentially 370-kilometre range anti-ship missiles that would be launched from Australia's aircraft, from the Super Hornet aircraft. It's not missiles that can reach thousands of kilometres across the ocean, but there will be major research conducted into genuine long-range, high-speed missiles that could, in theory, hit targets on other continents or in distant oceans.
Professor Rory Metcalfe from the Australian National University, ending that report from the ABC's Isabel Rowe. The winless Chiefs are facing some uphill battles in the new Super Rugby season, but for some young players, there are even tougher challenges on the home front. 20-year-old Locke Naitoa Akoi has welcomed twins during the lockdown, so there was no sidestepping the drills and chores and very little time to put his feet up. But luckily for Akoi, his supportive team say family comes first, and he's been able to turn to fellow players for much-needed advice. Rugby reporter Joe Porter has more.
It's a different life to what I was living a few months back.
No doubt. Did you always plan to have kids at 20, or was it a pleasant surprise?
I love it. I really love it. During lockdown, it was really good, and just being, a full-time father. But once the footy came back, it was a lot more challenging.
Those challenges usually revolve around a lack of rest for Akoi and his partner, Kayla.
I remember coming into work and I was on 4 hours sleep and coming in and just really tired.
But he's in good company at the Chiefs. Teammate Te Toiroa Tahuriorangi became a dad for the first time at just 17.
My little boy Thomas is 7 now, and I had him a week before my birthday, so pretty challenging. Obviously, I was young and didn't have much planned for the future. So, and looking back in hindsight, I know I've done a pretty good job, and that's just due to the support team. I have the beautiful wife. I have her name's Kelly, and she's taken the load. Without her, I guess I don't know how I'd be here.
And he credits his dad, Pairata, for setting an example for him to follow.
I've never seen, even boys in our team really connect with their fathers and having a father figure like my dad, and that who brought me up really well. Pretty much what I've been taught is what I'm teaching my son now. So it's just being present, being in that moment with your child, and showing them that at the end of the day it's all about loving and caring and being kind.
Tahuriorangi of Ngāti Pikiau and Ngāti Whakauwea descent says being part of the Chiefs whānau has been helpful, as it really does take a village to raise a child.
When you're in this Chiefs environment, you kind of feel the tendency of a family kind of environment. So our coaches are pretty lenient around if your family has a situation there that you can go home and be with them.
Akoi, who has Samoan heritage, says the Chiefs understand that putting families first will ultimately get the best out of the players.
First week of pre-season I got back, they sent me home on the Friday because I was coming in with such a big lack of sleep, and they were just saying, get some rest, because they're really family orientated and they know that if you're all good at home and your family's all good at home, then you can come in and work, and vice versa.
And while Akoi has plenty of teammates happy to dish out parenting tips, another Chiefs player has knowledge more specific to his situation.
A lot of the young dads here give me a few gold gems here and there. Ross Gildenhughes, he's got 2 twin girls. I talk to him a lot because there's no one else in the team that has twins. He gives me some good advice.
Tahuriorangi has some humble but sage advice for Akoi or any young fathers who might be struggling to balance work, social and family life.
It really did make me grow up a lot quicker and a lot of sacrifices. And you're right, getting that balance is definitely crucial because obviously you want to be there for your family because you just never know. You would have seen with the COVID and all that stuff just how much we kind of take life for granted. So another advice too is obviously you're not going to be able to do it by yourself, so it's having a great support system, having people to talk to. There's a few challenges, but man, if I can do it, anyone can do it.
After 3 straight losses, it's an uncertain season for the Chiefs, but with the club and his teammates to lean on, Akoi and his twins should be just fine. Mō te hōtaka o te ahipo nei, ko Joe Porter aho.
Some feedback from you before the 6 o'clock news. This person says Todd Muller and the other opposition MPs are spreading misinformation and fear about COVID-19 border control measures. This has led to a rapid upsurge in community testing for coronavirus. To date, the results have shown no community transmission. The opposition earlier demanded that border restrictions be lifted, that overseas students be granted entry and that some people be allowed to leave isolation or quarantine early. In light of public opinion, Todd Muller now says the border shouldn't be reopened.
RNZ News at 6 ngamahi nui ko Susana Leatawa tēnei. New laws restoring the right to legal representation in disputes over children in the family court come into force today. The change, part of a family court package in this year's budget, is a reversal of the controversial 2014 family law reforms. The Justice Minister Andrew Little says he'd like to make even more changes.
If I had it my way, I'd like to move a lot faster, but the reality is there's a lot of challenges and other claims on the budget, and it's got harder now because of the COVID-19 responsibilities that we have. But, the government is committed to seeing real change in the family court system.
Andrew Little, Ros Noonan, who chaired an independent review of the family court, says today's reform is just the beginning. She says free counselling must be reinstated and the legal aid threshold raised. National says the government's gradual rollout of infrastructure announcements is cynical electioneering. The government has unveiled 12 of the more than 150 projects that are getting funding to help kickstart the economy. It says more projects will be revealed in the coming weeks. National's leader Todd Muller says the government has a track record of making big promises but delivering nothing.
Their 2 signature policies that they went to the election with, Kiwi Build and Light Rail, both promised with much fanfare. Total inability to deliver, and that lack of capacity and competency to deliver will be this government's legacy.
Todd Muller says drip-feeding big-dollar announcements in the lead-up to the election is cynical, and he believes the public will see through it. Women, on average, owe more to the Ministry of Social Development than men for loans to cover essential items and emergency costs. The average amount owed doubled in the last 5 years, from about $680 to more than $1,300. For men, the average increase was from $585 to just over $1,000. Overall, women owe more, and Janet McAllister from the Child Poverty Action Group says there's a likely reason for that.
We would strongly suspect that the reason why women are bearing the brunt of the debt is because sole parents are bearing the brunt by borrowing for their children as well as themselves without a partner to share the debt.
Janet McAllister, who speaks for the Child Poverty Action Group. The Employment Court has thrown out an appeal by an Auckland retail company ordered to pay $100,000 for exploiting migrants. Shalini was fined last June for underpaying and overworking 7 migrant employees working at 2 liquor stores and a dairy. The company appealed, saying its director had already agreed to pay the workers out and it couldn't afford the fine. But the court has dismissed the challenge, saying labour exploitation can never be justified. The US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has called for the UN Security Council to extend an arms embargo on Iran indefinitely. The BBC's Nara Tawfiq reports.
The Security Council could be headed for a major battle. Washington has threatened to trigger a return of all UN sanctions on Iran if the arms embargo is not extended. But China said the U.S. had no right to activate so-called snapback sanctions since it left the nuclear deal known as the JCPOA in May of 2018. The Russian ambassador to the UN, Vasilina Benzier, said the U.S.'s ultimate goal was to antagonize Tehran and that its proposal was a utopia that would not fly. Iran's foreign minister participated in the meeting and warned that any change to the arms embargo timetable would be tantamount to undermining the nuclear deal in its entirety.
Nada Tawfiq with that report. One of Ngai Tahu Tourism's most popular guided walks in Fiordland is set to reopen in January after being closed for nearly a year. The 3-day wilderness experience on the Hollyford track was closed early in February after unprecedented heavy rain and flooding damaged the 2 private lodges on the track. It was then one of Ngai Tahu Tourism's businesses that were paused because of COVID-19. It's 4 minutes past 6. The All Blacks centre Jack Goodhue says he'd like to have represented the North Island in a North-South rugby game. The match, once a tradition on the rugby calendar, is being reintroduced. It will be played at Eden Park on August the 29th, with a selection based on which province a player made their first-class debut for. Before returning to his home province of Northland, Goodhue first played for Canterbury, so he'll end up playing for the South.
It's been great to represent Northland, but yeah, I understand the reasons for it, and it's still it'll be a good game of rugby, nevertheless.
Meanwhile, the All Blacks' end-of-year tour appears doomed as Northern Hemisphere unions are reportedly planning an 8-team tournament involving Japan, Fiji and the Six Nations. The All Blacks are scheduled to play England, Wales and Scotland in November, but the pandemic has thrown the tour into doubt. The Warriors have drawn up a wish list of loan players to replace 3 homesick team members who are on the verge of quitting the National Rugby League season. Interim coach Todd Patton has revealed the Warriors have issued NRL bosses with an ultimatum to get exemptions for families to join them in Australia by the time of their round 10 match against Cronulla in just under 3 weeks. Patton says that before the team agreed to base themselves in Australia, the NRL told them exemptions would be achievable. That's the news.
Coming up on 9 to noon tomorrow, social agencies say there's a gaping hole when it comes to housing teenagers who are homeless. UK correspondent Hugo Guy reports on the UK's local lockdown in Leicester. Melbourne author Mia Walsh on her unvarnished memoir of sex work, drugs, mental illness and friendship. And teenage inventor Thomas James' wheelie bin moving robot clinches him the Prime Minister's Future Scientist Prize. Join me, Lynn Freeman, in for Catherine Ryan on 9 to noon on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Taumaranui, also Coromandel. Showers in Northland and Auckland, some heavy until tonight. Showers spreading everywhere for a time tonight and tomorrow morning. Taupo and Bay of Plenty mainly fine. Taihape showers, some heavy, snow to 500 metres affecting many roads. Showers easing tomorrow morning. Taranaki to Kapiti coast, scattered showers more frequent and heavier tonight and tomorrow morning. Clearing Manawatu and Horowhenua Kapiti coast tomorrow. Gisborne to Wairarapa, also Wellington. Showers, some heavy with snow to 500 metres, easing tomorrow. Gale or severe gale southerlies. Kaikoura coast and Ranges and Canterbury, showers becoming isolated tomorrow, snow to 400 metres. Otago, Southland and Southern Fiordland, occasional showers clearing tomorrow afternoon. For the remainder of Marlborough, also Nelson, Buller, Westland and Northern Fiordland, fine weather. And Chatham Islands, rain or showers. RNZ National. It's coming up to 7 minutes past 6.
Thanks, Susanna. Kia ora anō. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. The government's unveiled the first wave of funding for infrastructure projects it says will create 20,000 jobs. There was almost 2,000 applications for $3 billion that's part of the COVID Response and Recovery Fund. 150 projects have been approved in principle, but only a dozen of them were detailed today, including the Auckland City Mission Apartment Complex, Christchurch's Coastal Pathway, the East Coast Rugby Park Grandstand and the Blenheim Art Gallery. I spoke to Infrastructure Minister Shane Jones and asked him how many of the 20,000 jobs they were claiming credit for were actually new.
So the 12-month period that Mr Mark Binns identified, which is the drop-dead moment for these projects to have actually made genuine progress and employed people, will provide an opportunity to sustain companies that are already employing people but have been dislocated by the uncertainty post-COVID in the construction infrastructure sector. And I've found it quite confounding as to why the media continues to confuse what we're doing. In post-COVID, this $3 billion is an injection into the economy to enable jobs to continue. Now, inevitably, new jobs will be created because people from time to time will find are transitioning out of jobs that no longer exist and they're coming to work in infrastructure. And that's why it's really important for a lot of these projects that they hook in with the local training organisations and make the most out of the apprenticeship and vocational assistance packages.
I suppose, Minister, the point is the media is testing your claim because the press release doesn't say continuing jobs, it says creating jobs, creating more than 20,000 jobs. And it goes on to say this is about creating jobs. So can you actually give me a figure? Because the one you're using is 20,000 jobs. Are you creating 20,000 jobs or not?
Yeah, no, the 20,000 figure has come from the due diligence carried out by Crown Infrastructure Partners. Those jobs may very well not exist in the absence of $3 billion worth of infrastructure development at the level of community infrastructure right through to the big end of town. So if you do not have the injection of pūtea, then you will not be creating jobs. Jobs will wither and disappear in the absence of capital.
Because the thing is, let's take one project, for example, the Auckland City Mission, which you've announced $22 million funding for. This is for their home ground apartment project. That project's underway. It's in the final stages of completion, yet you're claiming credit for 200 jobs. Those jobs already exist, don't they?
And in actual fact, many of these projects are not going to be able to get to the finishing line unless the Crown comes in and helps underwrite that area of uncertainty. So that's actually a brilliant example where a project was started. As a consequence of COVID, it's been dislocated. With the certainty associated with the additional pūtea, not only will those jobs and the people working for the firms have a greater level of certainty, but the firms themselves can, quite frankly, make themselves more resilient. That's a key feature of the $3 billion pūtea.
Was that a direct criteria to get the pūtea? You had to prove that the project would not go ahead or would, fail unless they got money from you? Did they have to prove
some
that?
Of those, in some of the cases, which will be revealed as we roll out the majority of the other projects, but in some cases, people have appealed to Mr. Binns and his committee that we're 2/3, 3/4 of the way. If you want us to turbocharge this, then can you work with us? We need some additional capital. Then we can give a greater confidence to the local tradesmen and the firms. I mean, that was one of the elements of the criteria. Obviously, they immediately passed the shovel-ready test. Others is in terms of making a contribution in some areas of the community to transforming local community infrastructure. Now, I heard some negative things being said in the House about the Christchurch project, and there's always a bit of to and fro when choices are made, but these choices reflect the ranking, by and large, associated with the work that Mark Binns did.
So, I mean, the headline is great, 20,000 jobs created, but is it accurate, Minister?
Yeah.
Or is it just a good headline?
Yeah, I really don't want to protract this element of the discussion. We have identified that figure. We have arrived at that figure as a consequence of the work carried out by Crown Infrastructure Partners. It is a period of 12 months. There will be projects that may very well have to be further shaped and defined, because I've learnt the hard way through the Provincial Growth Fund that you think you have a project, and when you start to get working really closely, you discover that they don't have all of the statutory permits, or that their project plan doesn't pass muster. So I don't think anyone should be distressed by the fact that there'll be a bit of to and fro on some of these projects, and that will be addressed either by the Provincial Growth Fund or Mr. Mark Binns.
So the whole objective here is to get these projects started within 12 months. They had to be able to go within that period of time. If they don't meet that time requirement, does their money get pulled?
Well, I'm imagining for certainly a lot of the more complicated projects where there may be private capital waiting to come in following the Crown capital, then there will be inevitable negotiations. But I've been assured by Mark Binns and the Crown Infrastructure Partners that they have a template, and they'll be very firm with the people that they're working with, that the other party has to show the colour of their money. And they've got a 12-month period to demonstrate significant progress and momentum. I suspect the smaller projects A number of them are already and waiting to go, and a host of them don't need consents at all.
So 12 projects announced today, but 150 have been approved. Why not put the list out now? Is it that you just want to travel around the country handing out money in the lead up to the election?
Well, there are a host of the projects that they inevitably will be covered by some commercial sensitivity, and we need to respect that, as we've always done through the Provincial Growth Fund. But I do think that now we've got this level of clarity and certainty, a host of the mayors from around the country, they will want to host events, and they will want to invite the politicians to come along and celebrate how they're going to turbocharge elements of their local community through this shovel-ready money. And there's nothing wrong with that. Any suggestion that it's an opportunity to sort of deliver in an Oscar Wilde fashion the sort of dance of the seven veils, I think is just tawdry criticism.
Let's talk about fisheries for a minute. So the Fisheries Minister, Stuart Nash, in this recording that has surfaced, compares the fishing sector to criminals. I think his words were, you think police deal with dodgy buggers, they've got nothing on the fisheries sector. Is he right? Do you agree with him?
Well, look, I don't want to comment directly on those remarks.
Why not?
And the person who made those remarks. I'll definitely talk about the industry. I have had a long, through my adult life, substantial interaction with the industry. I don't believe the industry contains grossly large numbers of people that are habitual lawbreakers. I think all industries have good eggs and bad eggs.
So, well, how does that work then when you have a minister who is supposed to be representing, overseeing that sector, and he's saying those things about the industry?
Well, look, I've played parliamentary rugby with Stu Nash, and he's an earthy sort of rooster, and he can answer for those remarks himself in relation to the industry. But in terms of me being an NZ First MP, and with a great knowledge of aquaculture and the fishing industry, it has not been my experience that the fishing industry is overrun with some type of Hannibal Lecter personality.
Are there too many bad eggs in the fishing industry, though?
No, I think that the regulators, they've focused on cases where there's been egregious failure to comply with the legislation from time to time. We get those court cases, but in all industries, whether it's dairy, whether it's extractive sector, whether it's horticulture, from time to time the regulators step in and they ping egregiously bad examples of non-compliant activity.
And that was the Infrastructure Minister, Shane Jones. It is 16 minutes after 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. The fishing sector says it's feeling let down by its minister after comments comparing them to criminals surfaced last night. They were made by Stuart Nash in a recorded conversation in 2018, where he also outlined his belief that New Zealand First was opposed to placing cameras on fishing boats. Here's our fisheries reporter, Conan Young.
Mr Nash's recorded comments about cameras have added weight to claims long made by environmental groups that New Zealand First was ensuring the ongoing delay in putting cameras on boats. But it's his comments about the fishing sector, revealed by Newshub last night, that have upset the country's fishers.
I've got police, fisheries, small business and tax. Fisheries is by far the most philosophically challenging. Do you think police deal with dodgy buggers? They got nothing on the fisheries sector.
Yesterday, Mr Nash insisted his comments were in fact only about Hawke's Bay Seafoods, which was prosecuted for misreporting catch, and not the sector as a whole. Today, fishers spoken to by RNZ said his words were frustrating to hear, given the work they'd been doing to avoid catching endangered seabirds and dolphins. Nobody was willing to provide a recorded interview, but one said Mr Nash's comments were a measure of the man. Iwi are major players in fisheries and own significant amounts of quota. The head of fisheries body Te Ohu Kaimoana, Dion Tuta, says his interactions with the minister have always been positive.
You know, what he said there, the comments of a new minister, I think he's in the role for like 2 months. And those, for me, reflect his initial impressions of what the industry is like. Since that time, so I feel for him, actually, with what's happened to him. And in the time, I can attest to the fact that the time that he's been minister, he's learned a hell of a lot about what the fishing industry is really like.
Allegations that New Zealand First opposed cameras have been painted as a cash for favours scenario, with the party receiving thousands of dollars from fisheries heavyweights Tallies. Tallies has not returned calls on this story. But Dion Tuta says his organisation has never lobbied New Zealand First to delay the introduction of cameras.
In our discussions with Ministry for Primary Industries, we've always been very clear that the policy settings around cameras need to be right before they're brought in.
Today, New Zealand First's Shane Jones, who's held a number of high-ranking positions within the Māori fisheries sector, said there was no truth to Mr Nash's comments that his party was against cameras.
There are rules around the confidentiality of Cabinet, but any suggestion that I in particular or our party has somehow undermined the ability of Mr Nash to do his job is a barefaced lie.
Mr Jones says there's nothing wrong with his party accepting donations from the fishing industry.
I just think it's a grubby and quite frankly a tawdry attempt to try and taint a figure who's come from Maori fisheries who will never ever resile from the fact that I am an industry apostle. Now, if some people want to dedicate money to my campaign and I openly disclose it, I think that's how democracy should work.
For his part, Stuart Nash says his comments from 2.5 years ago were made as a new minister who had yet to get a good understanding of how the sector actually worked. Today, he revealed he'd apologised to Winston Peters and Shane Jones over the remarks.
I think they took it well because it was heartfelt and it was meaning. I absolutely meant it. I got that wrong.
As for the cameras, their introduction, which was supposed to happen across the fleet this year, has again been delayed until at least October next year. Mō te hōtaka o te ahi, ko Konanyang tēnei.
And let's return to an earlier story here, which was the emergency summit being held in Hamilton to fast-track Auckland's bid to extract more water from the Waikato River. An agreement in principle has been reached between Auckland and the Waikato Regional Council. They've agreed that Auckland can now take an extra 25 megalitres of water a day from one area, along with another 50 megalitres from another unused allocation. The interim measures are to help the region's drought crisis. And let's head to Australia now. More than 30 Melbourne suburbs will go into a 4-week lockdown tonight in an attempt to bring an outbreak of COVID-19 cases across the city back under control. There have been another 73 cases reported today. The suburbs, which span 10 postcodes, will return to stay-at-home orders. Gatherings will be limited to just 2 people, and cafes and pubs and restaurants that had reopened will go back to takeaway only. The state's Premier Daniel Andrews has opened up 12 new testing sites and is urging people to use them.
This is not over. It won't be over for a long time. And the best and most important thing that we can all do, whether we're in one of these hotspot postcodes or not, is to follow the rules. Again, they're very simple. Keeping your distance, staying at home if you're sick, getting tested if you're sick, making sure that you cough into the crook of your arm, making sure that you wash your hands regularly. These are simple things, but they make a massive difference to the fight against this virus. They make a massive difference to us putting out this public health bushfire. Ultimately, if I didn't shut down those postcodes, I'd be shutting down all postcodes. And I don't think we want to get to that point.
Business owners say it will be a devastating blow to shut down again, just as the economy was starting to reopen. The ABC's Bridget Fitzgerald reports.
When Marilyn Zakowski heard the news she'd have to close her business for the second time this year, it was a kick in the guts.
Pure shock and horror. It was just like being punched, really.
She runs a gym in Taylors Lakes, one of the 36 suburbs going into lockdown in an effort to contain a spike in COVID-19 cases in Melbourne's north, northwest and west. Movement in and out of those suburbs will be restricted, and residents will only be able to leave the house for food and essentials, work and study, caregiving or exercise. It'll stay this way until the 29th of July, which means that just 9 days after it reopened, Marilyn Zakowski's gym will close again.
We didn't do anything wrong, and then you get a few people that go out and don't social distance, that causes a problem, and now we have got to suffer like so many other businesses and have to close down again for another month.
When restaurant owner Janine Barracan got to work yesterday afternoon, her first job was to cancel all future bookings.
We have bookings all the way till next month already, so when I got here, I had to call people and tell them that I have to cancel just because of the lockdown.
She only opened the Filipino restaurant in West Footscray in February.
It's a roller coaster ride because we were closed longer than we were open. Like I said, we were only open for 6 weeks and then we closed down for 2 months and then we just reopened again last June 5.
Maribyrnong Mayor Sarah Carter says cases are likely to increase and the challenge now will be to communicate the lockdown message as quickly as possible.
We're still expecting to see a raise in the numbers of cases confirmed. So it's not like playing catch up. It's just the need to be really agile and then not forgetting that we do have 40% of our residents that were born overseas. So it's one thing for you and I to watch the Premier's address, but making sure that the information is communicated in a variety of languages. And for some of those that, are listening to ethnic media, there's just a delay in that. So it's just making sure that we can reach everyone.
For the 310,000 people who live in those 10 postcodes, it'll be some time before life can return to normal. Glenroy woman Lydia Condemi feels she's already adjusted and is happy to remain cautious.
Because I'm 6 months pregnant as well, I'm probably even more aware of what's going on. So I tend to not leave the house. We do online delivery for shopping and that type of thing.
While lockdown will cut her off from her loved ones, she says it's a sacrifice worth making.
My family are in all the other lockdown suburbs as well, so not being able to see mum, grandparents, elderly and that type of thing, it's going to be tough, but we've done it once, so we'll do it again.
And that is the ABC's Bridget Fitzgerald with that report. The White House has taken the unusual step of assuring people President Trump does indeed read his daily intelligence briefings. It was reacting to allegations the president was briefed on intelligence that Russia had paid Islamist militants to kill US troops in Afghanistan, but didn't act in response. Mr. Trump says he had not seen the briefing. However, the New York Times, Washington Post and Wall Street Journal reported that he had received a written briefing earlier this year. The BBC's Katie Kay reports.
The president denies he ever saw intelligence on the Russian bounty payments. Democrats left their White House briefing saying ignorance is no defense.
If you're going to be on the phone with Vladimir Putin, this is something you ought to know. Whether it's caveated or not, this is something you ought to know. If you're inviting Russia back into the G8, this is something you ought to know.
These reports of Taliban bounties have put the spotlight once again on Mr. Trump's warm relationship with Mr. Putin. The White House, citing US sanctions as evidence, says no one has been tougher on Moscow than Trump.
We saw he expelled 60 Russian intelligence officers, sanctioned hundreds of targets, withdrew from the INF Treaty, the Open Skies Treaty, tried to halt Nord Stream, still trying to do that, impose visa sanctions and many other actions. So make no mistake, this president is prepared to act and will always act in protecting our American troops.
But in the past 3 months alone, since the Taliban bounty intelligence first emerged, Mr. Trump has called Mr. Putin a friend, offered humanitarian aid to Russia, and pressed for Russia to join the G7 group.
It's great to be with you.
The hand of friendship is at odds with Russia's own actions. Around the world, Mr. Putin has pushed Moscow's interests to the detriment of the West. In Crimea, in East Ukraine, in Syria, and now reports of more overt anti-American tactics in Afghanistan. Under Putin, Moscow has gained clout on the world stage. His next act is on the Russian stage. Tomorrow, the country decides whether to change the constitution so that Vladimir Putin can stay in power for another 16 years.
The BBC's Katie Kay with that report. As some countries begin to ease lockdown restrictions, people in the Czech Republic have held a dinner party at the capital's biggest landmark as a symbolic farewell to the COVID crisis. A 500-metre-long table was laid on the medieval Charles Bridge in Prague as several thousand strangers sat down to enjoy a meal together. The BBC's Rob Cameron reports from Prague.
Above the music and the clinking of cutlery, one heard a most unusual sound for this iconic landmark. People speaking Czech. Largely free of foreign tourists, Charles Bridge was transformed on this gloriously sunny evening into one long dining table as people gathered to mark what organisers described as the end of a period of crisis, although everyone here freely admitted that such celebrations might well turn out to be premature.
No, I think that the second wave is already here, probably coming soon, especially after this event. But yeah, so far we are all enjoying. No, I was joking, but we'll see. But let's not think about it right now, right here, and just enjoy it.
Certainly, however, there is a sense here that through swift and decisive action, Czechs have dodged a bullet. There have been just under 12,000 infections for this country of 10 million and around 350 deaths. Relaxing the lockdown has not sent the numbers soaring. There are several local outbreaks far from Prague, which is only recording around 15 infections a day. There was a palpable sense of optimism on the bridge this evening as people remembered what it was like to live again.
And that was the BBC's Rob Cameron with that report from Prague. And that's all we've got time for this evening. Don't forget, you can see Nick Trubridge's full interview with Grant Dalton. That will be up on our web page. And also, if you're in Wellington, in those suburbs that are getting some pretty gnarly weather, hunker down and stay safe. We hear it is a stormy night ahead of you all. Our news teams will keep you up to date through the evening. And first up, back with you first thing tomorrow morning.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Authorities have reached agreement in principle on Auckland taking more water from the Waikato River as an interim measure. 300,000 Melbourne residents are going back into lockdown for a month tonight as Victoria tries to contain a coronavirus resurgence. The government's unveiled the first wave of funding for infrastructure projects, but the opposition says it's electioneering. The right to legal representation in family court disputes has been restored, and the police are investigating claims of financial mismanagement by Team New Zealand. Those are the headlines. Our next news will be at 7.
Tonight on Nights, we've got some historical fiction to give away in our midweek hump quiz. Simon Morris previews the International Film Festival for At the Movies. We won't actually be going to the movies to see them. And Dr. Simon Mitchell explains why an anaesthetist was so crucial to the rescue of 13 members of a football team stuck in a flooded cave in Thailand.